The first time I suspected Victoria Sterling was a fraud, I was standing in front of a supposed lost Vermeer in her gallery's back room. Something about the brush strokes didn't quite match the master's technique, a detail most would miss. But after 15 years of restoration work and art authentication, these subtle signs were as clear to me as fingerprints. Magnificent, isn't it? Victoria's voice carried that particular tone of manufactured awe she reserved for potential investors, recently discovered in a private collection in Amsterdam. I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing. The painting was good, exceptional even, but it wasn't a Vermeer. The provenance documentation she'd shown me earlier had gaps, convenient ones that any serious collector would question. But Victoria had built her reputation on finding lost masterpieces, and questioning her expertise at Sterling Fine Arts was tantamount to career suicide in the San Francisco art scene. My name is Margaret Foster, and for the past decade, I've divided my time between teaching art history at Berkeley and running a small authentication consultancy. My specialty: identifying forgeries that fool even the most sophisticated collectors. It's not the kind of expertise that makes you popular at gallery openings, but it's earned me a reputation for absolute integrity in a world where that quality is rarer than a genuine Da Vinci. The brush technique in the window reflection, I said carefully, it's interesting. Victoria's perfectly maintained smile tightened slightly. At 45, she was the undisputed queen of the Bay Area art scene. Sterling Fine Arts had grown from a modest gallery to a powerhouse in just 5 years, largely due to her uncanny ability to source overlooked masterpieces from private European collections. The technique is consistent with Vermeer's middle period, she said dismissively. The provenance documents confirm it. I nodded, but my mind was already cataloging the inconsistencies. The pigments looked period appropriate, but there was something about the cracklier, the network of fine cracks in the paint, that felt too uniform, too deliberate. Natural aging creates random patterns. This was almost engineered. I'd love to have my team take a closer look, I offered. Pro bono, of course. A find like this deserves thorough documentation. That won't be necessary. Victoria's tone cooled considerably. We've already completed all required authentication procedures. Of course they had, and I was fairly certain I knew who had performed them. Marcus Bennett, a once respected authenticator whose recent certifications had raised eyebrows among serious scholars. But questioning his credentials would mean questioning Victoria's judgment, and by extension, the legitimacy of her entire collection. I should have left it alone, should have nodded, smiled, and kept my suspicions to myself. But integrity has always been my weakness, or my strength, depending on how you look at it. The signature, I said, leaning closer to the canvas. The flourish on the V, it doesn't quite match his other works from that period. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria stepped between me and the painting, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Margaret, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I know you mean well, but let's be clear. You're an academic. Teaching art history to undergrads is quite different from operating in the real art world. These pieces require discretion, understanding, a certain sophistication about how our world works. I understood perfectly. In the high-stakes world of fine art, questions about authenticity could sink million-dollar deals. Victoria wasn't just dismissing my expertise. She was warning me to keep quiet. Of course, I said mildly. I'm always eager to learn. Her smile returned, cold and professional. Stick to teaching, dear. Leave the dealing to professionals. That should have been the end of it. I should have walked away, focused on my students, my small consultancy, my quiet life of academic integrity. But 2 weeks later, everything changed. It started with a phone call from an old friend in Amsterdam. Michael van der Meer had been my mentor during my postgraduate work in art restoration, and his word carried weight in European art circles. Maggie, his Dutch accent was thicker than usual, suggesting agitation. Have you seen Sterling's new acquisition, the supposed Vermeer? I have, I said carefully, closing my office door at Berkeley. It's interesting. It's impossible, Michael said flatly. The provenance claims it came from the Backer collection, but I've personally cataloged every piece in that collection. This painting never existed there. My suspicions crystallized into certainty. Are you sure? Absolutely. And there's more. I've been hearing whispers about other pieces from Sterling Fine Arts, provenances that don't quite add up, documentation with convenient gaps. I sank into my chair, my mind racing. Have you spoken to anyone else about this? Not yet. But Maggie, if what I suspect is true, this could be one of the largest art fraud schemes in decades. After hanging up, I sat in my darkening office, staring at the art history texts lining my walls. If Michael was right, and I knew he was, then Victoria Sterling wasn't just selling the occasional questionable piece. She was orchestrating a massive fraud, one that threatened the integrity of the entire art market. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Victoria had connections throughout the art world, and her gallery's reputation seemed unassailable. More importantly, she had the one thing that gave her absolute power in our world: trust. Collectors trusted her judgment, trusted her authentications, trusted her to turn their millions into priceless masterpieces. I spent the next week quietly gathering information. My position at Berkeley gave me access to databases of art sales and provenance records. Nights that should have been spent grading papers were devoted to tracing the histories of Victoria's most prominent acquisitions. A pattern emerged, subtle but undeniable. Over the past 5 years, Sterling Fine Arts had sourced an improbable number of discovered masterpieces, each with documentation just solid enough to satisfy wealthy collectors, but with convenient gaps that would make true verification impossible. But I needed more than suspicions and database records. I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable evidence that would stand up to the intense scrutiny any accusations would face. That's when I decided to set up my own gallery. It wasn't as impossible as it sounds. Years of consulting work had left me with substantial savings, and I owned a converted warehouse space in Oakland that I'd been using for restoration work. More importantly, I had something Victoria couldn't buy: genuine expertise and connections with legitimate collectors. Over 3 months, I transformed the warehouse into the Foster Gallery of Fine Arts. It wasn't glamorous like Sterling Fine Arts, but it had something more valuable: authenticity. Every piece I displayed came with impeccable, verifiable provenance. Every authentication was performed with rigorous documentation. And then I began acquiring my own collection, pieces that would make Victoria Sterling take notice. It started with a legitimate early Monet, purchased from a private collector in Paris who trusted my reputation. Then came a small but genuine Degas, its provenance traceable through 3 generations of a single family. Each acquisition was carefully documented, each authentication performed with multiple independent verifications. Victoria noticed, of course. She sent her assistant to my opening night, then began showing up at the same auctions where I bid. I could feel her watching, assessing, probably wondering how a mere academic had access to such pieces. The trap was baited. Now I just had to wait for her to take it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Through my European connections, I learned of a private collection coming to market in Vienna. Genuine pieces with rock-solid provenance, including an early Rembrandt sketch that would make any gallery owner salivate. I arranged to view the collection, making sure word of my interest reached Victoria's ears. The pieces were extraordinary, not just the Rembrandt, but several other Dutch masters, each with documentation that would stand up to any scrutiny. As I expected, Victoria appeared in Vienna 3 days after I returned to San Francisco. What she didn't know was that I'd already secured the collection through a private arrangement with the owner, an old friend who understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. The next move was hers, and she didn't disappoint. "Margaret, darling." Her voice dripped honey as she swept into my gallery one Tuesday morning. "I've been meaning to stop by. Your little space is charming." I looked up from the catalog I was preparing, noting the calculated casualness of her $5,000 outfit. "Victoria, what a surprise." She wandered the gallery, making small talk about recent auctions and gallery openings. But I could see her eyes constantly returning to the photographs of the Vienna collection displayed on my desk. "I heard you were in Vienna recently," she said finally. "Interesting market there." "Very," I agreed. "Some remarkable pieces coming available." She picked up one of the photos, the Rembrandt sketch. "This is intriguing. You're pursuing it?" "Among others. The provenance is impeccable." Victoria set the photo down, adjusting her Cartier watch. "You know, Margaret, running a serious gallery requires more than just good taste. It requires capital, connections, experience in handling major acquisitions. And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. Are you suggesting something specific, Victoria? She smiled, all business now. A partnership of sorts. Sterling Fine Arts has the resources to handle acquisitions of this caliber. Your academic background could be valuable in our authentication process. And of course, you'd be well compensated. I let the silence stretch, pretending to consider it. The Vienna collection would be part of this arrangement. Naturally, along with your other recent acquisitions. Sterling Fine Arts would assume all financial responsibility, of course. Your role would be purely advisory. In other words, she wanted my legitimately sourced collection and my academic credentials to lend credibility to her operation. The pieces clicked into place. She wasn't just running a fraud scheme. She was building a facade of legitimacy to make her forgeries harder to detect. I'd need time to consider it, I said carefully. These pieces represent years of work. Of course, she stood, smoothing her silk blazer. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this are rare in our world. The threat was subtle but clear. Join her or become her competition. In the art world, the latter rarely ended well. After she left, I sat in my gallery surrounded by genuine masterpieces, each representing years of careful study and honest dealing. Victoria thought she was springing a trap, but she didn't realize she was walking into one herself. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Michael in Amsterdam, confirming that our network of authenticators was ready. The second was to my lawyer, ensuring all documentation of my collection's provenance was ironclad. The next morning, I called Victoria and accepted her offer. What followed was a whirlwind of contracts and negotiations. Victoria's lawyers were thorough, ensuring Sterling Fine Arts would have complete control over my collection and gallery operations. I signed everything without argument, watching as she systematically absorbed my legitimate acquisitions into her operation. Within a week, my carefully curated collection was moved to Sterling Fine Arts. Victoria wasted no time announcing a major exhibition, featuring the Vienna collection as its centerpiece. The art world buzzed with excitement. These were pieces that hadn't been seen publicly in generations. The opening was scheduled for the following month. Victoria spared no expense, inviting collectors, critics, and museum curators from around the world. My role was carefully scripted. I would be presented as Sterling Fine Arts' new academic consultant, lending my credentials to Victoria's already sterling reputation. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. The night before the opening, I sat in my empty gallery, looking at the bare walls where genuine masterpieces had hung. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Authentication team ready. Documentation complete. I smiled, thinking of Victoria preparing for her triumph, unaware that tomorrow would bring a very different kind of revelation. She'd built her empire on lies. Using my collection as the foundation of legitimacy, she needed to sell her forgeries. But she'd forgotten the first rule of art authentication. The truth always leaves a trace if you know where to look. Tomorrow, the art world would discover exactly who the real professionals were. The morning of the exhibition, I arrived at Sterling Fine Arts 2 hours before the scheduled opening. Victoria's gallery had been transformed into a showcase of opulence, track lighting perfectly positioned, champagne flutes gleaming, and security guards stationed at strategic points. The irony of protecting forged masterpieces with state-of-the-art security wasn't lost on me. Margaret. Victoria's voice carried across the gallery. I need you to review the catalog one last time. We can't have any academic inaccuracies. I accepted the glossy catalog, admiring the professional layout. My legitimate pieces were prominently featured, their impeccable provenances detailed with Victoria's typical thoroughness. But mixed among them were her discoveries, the questionable Vermeer, 3 suspicious Van Goghs, and several other pieces that had raised eyebrows in serious art circles. Everything looks perfect, I said, returning the catalog. The authentication documentation is particularly impressive. Victoria's smile flickered slightly. Was that uncertainty I detected? Yes, well, Marcus has been extremely thorough. Marcus Bennett. The key to Victoria's operation, though she didn't realize I knew exactly how key he was. Over the past month, while helping integrate my collection into Sterling Fine Arts, I'd been quietly building a complete picture of their fraud scheme. It was more sophisticated than I'd initially suspected. Victoria wasn't just dealing in forgeries. She was orchestrating a complex web of fake provenances, manipulated documentation, and carefully crafted stories about each piece's discovery. Marcus provided the technical validation, but the real genius was in how Victoria marketed the forgeries, mixing them with legitimate pieces like mine to create an aura of unquestionable authenticity. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. 3 weeks earlier, during the collection transfer, I'd accidentally left my laptop open while meeting with Victoria's authentication team. The specially configured device had captured every detail of their internal network, including encrypted communications with their forgers in Eastern Europe. Michael's tech experts had taken care of the rest. The Rembrandt sketch should be the centerpiece, Victoria was saying now, directing her staff to adjust the lighting. The provenance story is perfect, 3 generations in a Viennese private collection, only recently discovered during an estate evaluation. I watched her adjust the frame slightly, remembering how she'd reacted when I first shown her the piece. Her eyes had held that particular gleam I come to recognize. The look of someone seeing not art, but profit. The sketch's discovery story meshes perfectly with the other Dutch masters, she continued. It creates a compelling narrative about lost treasures emerging from old European collections. She was right about the narrative. The art market runs on stories as much as authenticity. Collectors don't just buy art, they buy the romance of discovery, the exclusivity of owning something thought lost to history. Victoria understood this better than anyone. It's what made her forgery scheme so brilliant and so dangerous. But she'd overlooked one crucial detail. The very legitimacy of my collection that made it so valuable to her scheme would also be her undoing. During the past month, I'd watched her operation from the inside, seeing how she and Marcus subtly altered documentation, created false histories, and built seemingly airtight provenances for their forgeries. More importantly, I'd seen how they used my legitimate pieces to lend credibility to their fakes. What they didn't realize was that I brought something else with me besides my collection. A network of the world's top authenticators, all quietly documenting every aspect of sterling fine arts operation. Dr. Elise Dubois from the Louvre had posed as a potential buyer, spending hours examining Victoria's lost Vermeer while secretly documenting the technical inconsistencies in its composition. Professor Heinrich Weber from Berlin's Gemäldegalerie Gallery had reviewed the Van Goghs, his expertise in pigment analysis revealing the careful but detectable use of modern materials. But the real masterstroke had come from an unexpected source. 2 weeks ago, I'd received a call from Thomas Wright, a former student of mine who now worked in digital forensics. He'd found something fascinating in Sterling Fine Arts financial records, a pattern of payments to a small art restoration company in Prague, amounts far too large for legitimate restoration work. The payments correspond exactly with the dates of Victoria's major discoveries. Thomas had explained. And here's the interesting part, the company doesn't actually exist. It's a front for a known forgery operation. I'd added his findings to the growing file of evidence, each piece carefully documented and verified. The authentication reports were damning, but it was the financial trail that would make the case unassailable. Now, watching Victoria direct the final preparations for her grandest exhibition yet, I thought about the other preparations taking place behind the scenes. Michael had arrived from Amsterdam last night, bringing with him a team of experts equipped with the latest authentication technology. They were setting up in a nearby hotel, ready to move the moment the exhibition opened. Margaret? Victoria's voice pulled me from my thoughts. The collectors will be arriving soon. I need you to be prepared to discuss the academic significance of these pieces. Your educational background lends weight to their importance. I smiled, appreciating the irony. Of course, I prepared detailed notes on each piece's historical context. Excellent. She paused, studying me with those calculating eyes. You know, Margaret, I had my doubts about bringing you in. Academics can be so rigid in their thinking. But you've shown a remarkable ability to adapt to the realities of our business. The realities of our business. Such an elegant euphemism for fraud. I've learned a lot from you, Victoria, I said truthfully. She nodded, satisfied. The art world requires a certain flexibility. Not everything fits into neat academic categories. Sometimes the story of a piece is as important as its provenance. Speaking of stories, I said carefully, I've invited a few colleagues from Europe. Their perspective on the Dutch masters could be valuable. European academics? Victoria's smile tightened slightly. That wasn't necessary. Marcus has already completed all required authentications. Of course, I said smoothly, but their presence adds scholarly credibility to the exhibition. After all, these pieces represent significant art historical discoveries. She couldn't argue without revealing her concern. Instead, she nodded curtly and moved away to supervise the champagne arrangement. I checked my phone. A message from Michael. Team in position. All equipment calibrated. Documentation teams ready. The next few hours passed in a blur of final preparations. I watched Victoria working the room, her confidence growing as everything fell into place. The gallery looked perfect, each piece positioned to tell its carefully crafted story of discovery and exclusivity. At 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the opening, Victoria gathered her staff for final instructions. I stood at the back, observing as she detailed how each major piece should be presented to collectors. Remember, she concluded, these works represent some of the most significant discoveries in recent art history. Their provenances are impeccable, their authentications beyond question. Tonight, Sterling Fine Arts cements its position as the premier source for important historical works. The staff dispersed to their positions. Victoria turned to me, her expression triumphant. Ready for your academic debut in the real art world? I met her gaze steadily. Absolutely. I think tonight will be quite educational for everyone. She nodded, missing the double meaning in my words. The first guests will be arriving soon. Remember, focus on the historical significance. Leave the provenance discussions to me. As she walked away, I sent a final text to Michael. Opening in 15 minutes. Begin authentication protocols. The trap was set. Victoria had spent a month integrating my legitimate collection into her operation, using my academic credentials to bolster her credibility. Now those same credentials would help expose the truth about her discoveries. I watched the security team do their final sweep, thinking about the other teams preparing to move. In less than an hour, some of the world's top authenticators would begin systematically documenting every flaw, every inconsistency, every piece of evidence that would bring down Sterling Fine Arts. Victoria had built her empire on beautiful lies, using my legitimate pieces as cover for her forgeries. But she'd forgotten something crucial about art. The truth isn't just in the documentation or the provenance. It's in the brushstrokes, the pigments, the thousand tiny details that no forger, no matter how skilled, can perfectly replicate. Through the gallery's windows, I could see cars beginning to arrive. Collectors, critics, museum curators, all eager to see Victoria's latest discoveries. They would see something remarkable tonight, but not quite what they expected. I straightened my jacket and checked my phone one last time. Everything was in place. In a few hours, the art world would learn the truth about Sterling Fine Arts' magnificent collection. Victoria appeared beside me, practically glowing with anticipated triumph. Shall we? She gestured toward the door. I smiled, thinking of the authentication teams waiting nearby. Yes, I said. Let's show everyone exactly what we discovered. The exhibition opening unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, champagne in hand, weaving stories about each masterpiece that had collectors practically reaching for their checkbooks on the spot. The brush technique is unmistakably Vermeer, she was telling a group of wide-eyed collectors. The way he captured the light through the window, it's his signature style from the middle period. I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m. Michael's team would be starting their work now. The gallery hummed with excitement as San Francisco's elite art patrons mingled, sipping champagne and discussing the millions they were prepared to spend. I recognized several museum directors, including James Harrison from the De Young Museum, who was studying the questionable Vermeer with intense interest. Victoria's triumph seemed complete. She positioned my legitimate pieces strategically throughout the gallery, using their undeniable authenticity to lend credibility to her forgeries. The Rembrandt sketch, genuine and perfectly documented, drew visitors naturally toward the suspicious Dutch masters hanging nearby. At 8:15, right on schedule, Michael entered the gallery. He wasn't alone. Dr. Dubois from the Louvre and Professor Weber from Berlin flanked him, their expressions professionally neutral as they surveyed the room. Victoria's smile flickered slightly when she saw them. "Margaret," she hissed, appearing at my elbow, "who are these people?" "Distinguished colleagues," I said calmly. "They were very interested in your Dutch master's collection." Before she could respond, Michael approached, extending his hand. Ms. Sterling? Michael van der Meer, Dutch National Art Archives. Your collection is fascinating. Victoria recovered quickly, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes. How wonderful to have European expertise here tonight, though I assure you, all pieces have been thoroughly authenticated. Yes. Dr. Dubois joined in, her French accent precise. By Marcus Bennett, I believe. A rather interesting choice for Dutch masters. The trap was closing. Victoria maintained her composure, but I could see her mind racing, calculating risks and possibilities. Perhaps, Michael suggested, we could discuss the technical details of the authentication process, particularly for the Vermeer. The provenance documentation mentioned the Backer collection. Victoria's face paled slightly. She knew as well as I did that Michael had personally catalogued that collection. I'm afraid the detailed documentation is at our secure facility, she said smoothly, but I'd be happy to arrange a private viewing. No need. Dr. Dubois interrupted, removing a tablet from her bag. We've already completed our preliminary analysis. The next hour was a masterpiece of professional demolition. As collectors watched in growing shock, the team of experts systematically exposed the truth about Victoria's prized discoveries. Dr. Dubois projected microscopic images of the Vermeer's paint layers, revealing pigments that didn't exist in the 17th century. Professor Weber demonstrated how the cracklier pattern had been artificially induced. Michael presented documentation proving the impossibility of the provenance stories Victoria had crafted. This isn't just a single forgery, Michael explained to the stunned audience. It's a systematic fraud operation using legitimate pieces to mask an extensive forgery network. Victoria stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking as her empire crumbled around her. When Thomas Wright arrived with the financial documentation linking Sterling Fine Arts to the Prague forgery operation, she finally broke. You, she turned to me, rage replacing her usual polish. You planned this? All of it? No, Victoria, I said quietly. You planned this the moment you decided to steal my collection and use it to legitimize your forgeries. The gallery erupted in chaos. Collectors who had spent millions on Victoria's discoveries demanded explanations. Museum directors who had authenticated pieces for their institutions pulled out phones, making urgent calls. Security guards looked uncertainly between Victoria and the exit. The legitimate pieces, James Harrison from the De Young asked, "How can we distinguish?" Every piece from my collection, I said clearly, has complete, verifiable documentation. I prepared a detailed catalog. Victoria laughed suddenly, a harsh sound that cut through the commotion. You self-righteous academic. You think exposing this changes anything? Art is about stories, about making people believe. I sold them what they wanted to believe. No, I corrected her. You sold them lies. Art is about truth, in every brush stroke, every pigment, every detail that true masters left behind. That's what you never understood. The police arrived at 9:30. Victoria maintained her dignity as they led her away. But Marcus Bennett broke immediately, confirming every detail of the operation. The Prague connection, the forged documentation, the elaborate scheme to mix forgeries with legitimate pieces, it was all exposed. In the aftermath, my phone didn't stop ringing. Museums worldwide wanted my authentication services. Collectors begged for help evaluating their purchases. The art world was in upheaval, and somehow I'd become its voice of integrity. 1 week after the exhibition, I sat in my restored gallery space in Oakland, surrounded by my legitimate collection, returned by court order from Sterling Fine Arts. Michael had flown back to Amsterdam, but not before helping me establish new authentication protocols that would become the industry standard. You've changed things, he told me before leaving. The art world needed this wake-up call. Looking at my collection now, I thought about Victoria's words about stories and belief. She wasn't entirely wrong. Art does tell stories. But the true masterpieces, the ones that survive centuries, tell stories of authenticity, of human genius and creativity. The media called it the Sterling Scandal, but its impact went far beyond one fraudulent gallery. The incident sparked a revolution in art authentication, leading to stricter protocols and more transparent documentation requirements. My authentication consultancy became the gold standard, trusted by museums and collectors worldwide. Victoria faced multiple federal charges for fraud and money laundering. The The trial made headlines, exposing the dark underbelly of the art world. Marcus Bennett turned state's evidence, revealing a network of forgery operations that reached across Europe. But the real victory wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about protecting the integrity of art itself, the genuine masterpieces that human creativity has produced across centuries. 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victoria, writing from federal prison. "You were right," she wrote, "about all of it. I forgot that real art carries truth in every stroke. Perhaps that's why your collection always outshone my forgeries. Authenticity has a quality that can't be faked." I folded the letter and looked at the Rembrandt sketch hanging on my wall, the genuine one that had helped expose the fraud. In the master's confident lines, I could see the truth that Victoria had never understood. Real art doesn't need elaborate stories or false provenances. Its authenticity speaks through centuries, carrying the unmistakable mark of genuine human creativity. My gallery flourished, but not in the way Victoria's had. Instead of chasing profits through deception, I built a reputation for absolute integrity. Young artists and collectors sought my guidance, learning to recognize the difference between true masterpieces and beautiful lies. The art world changed too. The Sterling scandal led to the creation of an international authentication database, making it harder for forgers to operate. Museums implemented stricter verification protocols, and collectors learned to value provenance over sensational discovery stories. Sometimes, late at night in my gallery, I think about Victoria and the choice she made to value profit over authenticity. In the end, her greatest forgery wasn't the fake Vermeer or the suspicious Van Goghs, it was the lie she told herself about what art really means. As for me, I returned to teaching at Berkeley, but with a new course added to my schedule: Authentication and Integrity in the Art World. My students learn not just about brushstrokes and pigments, but about the fundamental truth that Victoria never grasped. In art, as in life, authenticity is the only masterpiece that truly matters. The Rembrandt sketch still hangs in my gallery, a reminder of how truth prevails in its own quiet way. Its genuine brushstrokes tell a story no forger could ever replicate, a story of real creativity, true mastery, and the enduring power of artistic integrity. And that's a story worth more than all the forged masterpieces in the world.